This is the Remarkable Podcast with multi-award-winning dog trainer Allie Smith, where you'll learn all sorts of wonderful things about your dog to deepen your bond, solve your problems, and achieve all your training goals.
Hey, and welcome to this episode of the Remarkable Podcast. I'm Allie Smith, and I'm going to be talking to you today a little bit about board and trains. If you've got a dog who does have a certain list of problems, a board and train or a doggy boot camp is something that you may have considered for your dog. Primarily because you're probably quite stressed. You're going through a lot of changes with your dog, and all of a sudden you don't really know what to do. And it's totally understandable. Which is why I want to go through with you today what exactly a doggy boot camp is, or a board and train. Board and train tends to be the more formal name for them. And I want to discuss with you essentially what you could expect from a board and train environment for your dog. There's a reason I have elected not to provide a board and train service. This does come with a caveat that not all board and trains are made the same. There will be ones that are better than others, and there will be ones that don't necessarily fall into the category that I'm discussing here. However, the vast majority do, from my experience within the industry. Hence the reason that I want to talk to you today about exactly that and give you guys the insight as to what you could expect if you were to go to a board and train. We are going to be framing this today in the context of reactivity. However, this does apply to pretty much any and all dogs that you are struggling with for one reason or another. So let's get into that. What is reactivity? Reactivity, simply put, is a socially unacceptable reaction to a socially acceptable event, which is to say that your dog will overreact with excitement or with an aggressive display towards a thing that they should find normal within their lives. Now, we do ask our dogs to deal with a lot. The human world is not necessarily what a dog would choose. So it's not unusual that they will struggle with certain aspects of the human world. It's very reasonable that they find some aspects of it very hard to deal with and consequently react or overreact in a certain way. Sometimes within the reactive dog community, you will find that dog owners will specify what sort of reactivity their dog has, whether that's a reactivity towards men, towards ducks, or whether it might just be in a specific instance, for example, when they're on leash. These are essentially quantifiers. I find that they're often used as a measure, as a way to say that they're not that bad. It's like trying to soften the blow. And to anybody out there who does do this, please don't feel you have to, because this is not an unusual thing. This is not an abnormal thing that your dog is going through. Just because they don't necessarily understand the world exactly how they should do is not a bad thing. We just have to teach and show them how to get through that. So, one of the ways that we can potentially show our dogs how to get through that emotion is with a board and train or a doggy boot camp. So what is a board and train or a doggy boot camp? They essentially will shortlist the problem with you. They will go through exactly your dog's history and find out what the problem is before saying, okay, we will take your dog away for X amount of days and bring them back to you after that with that problem resolved. That's the premise. And it sounds like a really good premise, right? It's like when you take your car to the garage and go, hey, it's not working as it should do, and I don't know why, but this is what I've experienced. And they go, okay, that's fine, Allie. I'll have a look at it and I'll give you a call when it's ready. Sounds great, right? Yeah, can be great, can work, but in a lot of instances, it's a little bit more complicated than that, because dogs aren't cars. Dogs are much more complicated than a piece of machinery. So it's something that I would really, really thoroughly encourage you to consider as we go through this. So what are the benefits of a boot camp? Very similar to what I just said with the mechanic. They will give you, or they can potentially give you, a solution to a problem in a finite amount of time with no significant effort or input from you, which when you're stressed, when you're tired, and when you're going through a behavioral event with your dog, can be an incredibly appealing solution. And trust me, when I was going through this with Indy, this was something I looked at. So please, it's fairly normal to consider this option. But let's just say it's not all sunshine and roses. So what are the drawbacks of a board and train? Firstly, you've got the training methods. I have yet to find a single institution that uses modern methodologies to train the dogs within their care. Most often, these institutes will be a more balanced style of training, which means that they use all 4 quadrants of operant conditioning. That's the technical term, but the more accessible term is that they will punish your dog. They will use potentially aversive tools that will guide your dog to do what they want them to do by punishing them in some way, shape or form. And there will be people that will argue that with me, but the tools don't work unless they have an element of punishment to them. Otherwise, literally, as I just said, they just wouldn't work. So they will take your dog away from you. They will pop them into a kennel style environment where they will be away from you. They will be in the care of this trainer or trainers, and they will be taught day by day exactly what's meant to be going on and exactly how they should behave in this environment, or to get them through a certain problem. And the training style, when we do use all 4 quadrants as opposed to just positive reinforcement, that almost always yields what a trainer will call a fallout. A fallout is a side effect. They are largely problematic. So it's essentially you solve one problem to create another one. And those fallout behaviors can actually be worse than the initial ones. So to me, and to veterinary science, I mean, pretty much every institution across the world of vets will say that there is zero reason to use any aversives in training, which means that using all 4 quadrants is not scientifically backed. And there's multiple studies that go into that too, which is always astonishes me then when people use the other quadrants. So yeah, proper training, ideal training is going to focus on positive reinforcement. And that's kind of the bottom line there. Most doggy boot camps do not. The next big factor in a doggy boot camp and the learning that goes on there with your dog is stress. The additional stress of living in an environment like kennel can sincerely change a dog from the very, very start. It can change their reaction. Taking you away from your dog will change their reaction. Taking them out of their home will change their reaction, because much the same as like if you've ever been on a business trip and you spend 4 days in a hotel and you're in a strange office and in a strange environment and they're asking you to do all this learning, your ability to learn is impeded. Your ability to communicate is impeded. Your ability to relax is impeded. And the same can be said for your dog in an environment like this, where other dogs might be barking, they might be howling, they might be restless. It's quite a stressful environment, and it's a very hard environment for a dog to relax within. Now add in the fact that they're getting intensive training to get them through a problem and have no time to take a step back and relax and actually process that event. To me, that's a recipe for disaster. Not only does it limit your dog's ability to learn in that environment, it exposes them to a whole bunch more stress that they just don't need. And if you've got an anxious dog, if you've got a dog who is scared, adding in that level of stress is just going to push that poor dog too far. And that's saying it lightly. And then we've got the environment. A large part of your dog's learning every day since the start of their little lives comes from their environment. That environment is incredibly key to their learning success, it's incredibly key to their learnt behaviors. So if you want to change their learnt behaviors, which a lot of reactivity is and a lot of bad behavior is, then you have to tackle the environment as well. The environment has to be a part of their training, because it's like learning to ride a bike on a stationary bike and then going outside and doing a marathon. It doesn't necessarily translate. Just because you can ride, I don't know the length of a cycling marathon, or if you can cycle a marathon, but learning to cycle 25 miles and then competitively going and cycling 25 miles, they're not the same thing, are they? So it's very, very similar when you do that with your dog in this style of training. It will, again, limit their learning capacity. It will limit their ability to translate that learning into real life, which is the important part of that training. And overall, it makes it a whole lot less effective. And then we come to like the handover, when the trainer will give them back to you. Typically, these handover sessions are only an hour long, and to give you the requisite knowledge and even to download all the training experiences that they've done with your dog across the time that they've had your dog in 1 hour, that's really hard, because in complex behavioral cases, and reactivity is quite complex, it's a case that they will be teaching your dog something new every day. They will be repeating things and they will be changing conditions, and essentially it becomes almost an experiment as to how to get your dog through things. And trying to convey that to you whilst, you're all delighted to see your dog and you're trying to learn all this stuff and you're trying to get your dog settled back down and practice the behaviors that the trainer has gone through with your dog, that becomes quite tough in such a short amount of time. Please remember that, I have studied dog behavior for quite a while. And for me to pass through everything that I think a reactive dog parent should know, regardless of whether their dog is through their most problematic phase or not, for me to tell them exactly like what their dog's going through, how they feel, what their mind is trying to convey, and how we prevent setbacks and things like that, that's going to take more than an hour in itself. So how you get continued support and how you translate that into the real world is then put down to a very short time period where your dog and you and the trainer will all overlap, which just means that the continued success of a board and train is often quite low. And it's why oftentimes board and train clients will come to somebody like me and go, hey, we tried this, it didn't work, can you help? And at which point I will go, yes. So if you do need help, by all means, I am here for you. And then you've got the cost. Oh my gosh. The cost aspect of a board and train is colossal. And I cannot say that enough. And for me to say it's colossal, and I charge probably above industry average, because without trying to gloat, I am above industry average, so I'm charging my worth. For me to be able to say that, the cost of this is close to extortionate should say a lot. And don't get me wrong, I know that it's an expensive thing to run and that you get a lot of closeness to a trainer, but when the average price for addressing reactivity as a problem is somewhere in the region of $3,000 to $5,000, that's a hell of an ask from any dog parent, and that will take a toll on most people's bank accounts, right? Certainly most people that I've ever dealt with. So that's a hell of a thing to swallow. And when you sort of look at the fact then that boot camps or board and trains, whatever you want to call them, they rarely come without a consequence. They're rarely truly successful throughout the lifetime of your dog, that your dog's learning ability has been limited by stress. It's been limited by the lack of environmental equivalency. They're not doing it in your dog's natural environment. And then the fact that the boot camp will limit your learning of how to effectively work with your dog in the future and how you deal with setbacks and things like that, is it truly worth it? To me, the answer is no, because when I look at, say, a trainer or behaviorist who specializes in reactivity, who gets results time after time, and the parents, like, touch wood, I've never had one of my reactive dog parents back, at least not for reactivity, because I leave them with all the tools that they need to progress forward and keep progressing, because that's what they deserve. They deserve to walk away from that going, not only has my dog improved significantly with my time with Ali, but I now know how to push them forward and fine-tune this for the rest of their lives, and get them to a point where they are not reactive, or they are minimally reactive, or we've achieved our goals in training. That's my job. That's what I do. That's why I do it. I love it. I love being able to walk away from a dog parent and go, I know that they're going to succeed. And touch wood, as I said, I've never had anybody back for reactivity as a result of that. So that's what I would always suggest that you do, is that you find a trainer who specializes in reactivity, a behaviorist who specializes in reactivity, and you work with them on a one-to-one basis or small group basis, and you work through it together. You take all the lessons, all the learning, all the aspects of that training that are going to combine together to create you a phenomenal dog parent, and your dog a phenomenally adaptive dog who is going, and when you two come together and work together, you are going to find that the quality of your relationship is unparalleled, because you understand them almost fundamentally. You're advocating for them from the very start. Your dog is working with you. They are listening to you, and they are attentive, and they know that you've got their best interest at heart, which is phenomenally powerful. Which leads me to kind of summarize with the fact that dog trainers don't actually train dogs. And it's the big reason why board and trains are not as effective as they should be. Or at least in my opinion, they're not as effective as they should be. Because dog trainers don't train dogs, we train people. It's why online dog training is as powerful as it is, because we act as a conduit, we act as a translator between you and your dog, and give you the tools, the understanding, and the learning to approach your dog with confidence, with knowledge, and with every way of communicating clearly to your dog exactly what you want them to do, how you want them to do it, and how to move forward from the stage that they are at to get them to where we need them to be. That's what a good dog trainer does. That's what a good behaviorist does. That's why we do what we do. But most of that work is done with you and not with your dog. It's a big chunk of, like I said, it's a large reason that board and trains are not as effective as you might want them to be. It's a sizable part of why I work in the way that I work. It's a huge chunk of why I will not take a board and train client. It's an incredible... Learning with your dog is an incredible part of the reactivity process. And in a way, it's a gift. So offloading that to a board and train is really going to work in your favor. So I know reactivity can be overwhelming. I know that sometimes you just want to give up and let somebody else deal with it. But it's worth it. I promise you. Take a little bit of time for your own self-care if you have to. Or, absolutely do that regardless of whether you have to or not. But come back to a trainer like myself, or I can recommend a number of fantastic ones. If you would prefer to do in-person learning, but the likes of my online program is built to help you succeed. It's built to get you through this with your dog and come out the other side with every aspect of learning that you could ever need. Okay, so on that note, I think I've explained why board and trains are not necessarily the best option for you and your dog. I think I've given you some great alternatives to look through and work through. I will link in the show notes to this some really great resources that you can have a look at. And by all means, if you've got any questions, email me, drop me a message on Instagram, or do whatever it is that you would like to do, and make sure that you like, subscribe, rate, review, do whatever it is that you can on this platform, because it always means a huge amount to me. Thank you so much for listening, and I will see you next week.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. If you want to help this podcast grow, go rate, review, and recommend to dog lovers everywhere.